Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I am so excited to be here today with Surbhee Grover, who is a consultant and runs the firm Steel and Graffiti. And do I have that right, Surbhee?
That is correct, Will.
All right, and Steel and Graffiti. And in addition to that, Surbhee launched a personal care brand last year, Love, Indus, and I absolutely love the website. I think it's just so amazing, the design. So, Surbhee, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to hear about your whole process of creating Love Indus.
Wonderful, Will. I'm so excited to be on.
Let's
So,
let's give people,
yeah,
like, before we jump into Love Indus and the whole process of creating a brand from scratch and product formulation and all the aspects of that. Just give us, orient us a little bit. Give us sort of a 1 minute, 2 minute overview of your background and your consulting practice, and then we'll transition to building, being a founder of this personal care brand.
sure thing, Will. Will, as you know, I started my career in branding back in India, actually. And then I moved to New York in 2002, went to NYU, and then I was at Booz Allen Hamilton or Booz and Company for about 7 years, specializing in growth and innovation strategy for a large part in New York and then for a couple of years in London. And then I moved back in 2011 and I set up Steel and Graffiti, still focusing on the CPG space. Lavenders, the idea was born in about, I'd say, 2015, 16, but it took about 5 years and a pandemic to take it to market.
Okay. So you're an experienced management consultant. You have this idea to start a personal care brand, or I don't know, do you call it a personal care brand or cosmetic brand, or how do you refer to your
So
business?
I call it a skincare and wellness brand, Will. So it is in the category of beauty and cosmetic, but I refer to it as a skincare and wellness brand.
Skincare and wellness. What was the initial concept? So, what was the idea behind it?
Sure. I'll tell you a little bit about the inspiration, and it's interesting how our lives intersect. In 2015, 16, just coincidentally, I was doing a lot of work in luxury and skincare for a couple of different brands. I was working on for a diamond company, helping them with their US growth strategy. I was also helping a retail brand in Australia figure out how to grow in the US, and I was helping a skincare brand from Singapore enter the US market. So it was like this perfect intersection of all these projects that made me realize that in the US, there weren't a lot of luxury brands of Indian origin. Um, and that was like one of the insights that sort of stayed with me. The other thing was, any of the brands that did exist were all sort of natural and Ayurveda, which is a very specific sort of, science of beauty that comes from India. So I realized that there were all these concepts in 2015, 16. It sort of came together to me that things like coconut oil and turmeric and yoga, all these concepts were becoming increasingly popular from that part of the subcontinent. But because I actually had grown up in all over India, right, and I realized that these concepts barely scraped the surface of what that subcontinent had to offer. So that was sort of the germ of the thought. And it also helped that I had started my career in India in personal care. So I touched upon that very, very briefly, but my first job in India had been on one of the largest hair care brands in India, which is a coconut oil hair care brand, right? And then I'd also worked at L'Oreal and helped L'Oreal enter the Indian market. So life sort of came full circle, and the entire concept was born that I wanted to get a lot more of these rich regional ingredients and customs and rituals that I was so intimately familiar with. But at the same time, my career at Booz in consulting had honed my skills and expertise in growth and innovation. And I wanted to marry the two and bring bring to market a luxury skincare and wellness brand that harness these regional riches, but these were made even more efficacious and powerful using technology and innovation that I'd been familiar with, and I'd had sort of the um, the privilege of experiencing because of my career and also because of being in New York, which is sort of the hub of where you'd see a lot of these new technologies and innovations exhibited.
Amazing. So you have this idea that there's this white space or open space of a luxury brand from the Indian subcontinent around wellness and skincare using regional ingredients and enhanced with technology aspect to it. Um, how did that evolve from there? So you have this initial concept, and then how did you evolve that to actually getting the brand launched?
Sure thing. So, well, I mean, there are like basic logistical things that you got to do, which, I won't get into details because I think a lot of us are familiar with that, with, having set up our own company. So there's sort of, just figuring out like what kind of, company structure, et cetera, you want. But that to me was like a smaller part. The fundamental thing was, what are the insights, honing in on the value proposition, making sure that we really were responding to consumer needs. So, for example, this concept that I've talked about took various forms, and I spent almost, I'd say, about 9 months to a year doing diligence and research around consumer needs, because this is an incredibly crowded market space. So even though the germ of the idea and the concept was exciting, we actually built out, I had two other people help me, we built out different brand concepts, and I personally must have spoken to or done focus groups equivalent to speaking to about 80 or 90 consumers, in-depth conversations where I tested about 7 or 8 different concepts. For example, we tested a concept which was around inspired by the royal rituals of India, right? So that was one concept. And then we tested 8 or 9 before we honed in on this one, which is the one that the consumers responded most positively to. So there was one aspect of it, which was just the brand concept itself, uh, and sort of doing the diligence and getting market feedback and honing it till the time it felt sharp and ready and true. So that was one aspect. The second aspect of it that I started to talk about, which is incredibly crowded market space, the number of brands that get launched in a year is astronomical. So what we did was look for insights and benefits and needs where we felt that the current market offerings were not really fulfilling. So to give you an example, one of the insights we had was the skin around our lips is just as fragile as the skin under our eyes, right? And yet, while you have so many under eye creams, you have very little in terms of solutions for the lines around your lips. And that was the germ of an idea, which then led us to create a product called Freedom of Expression, which is for all sorts of expression lines, including these vertical lines or smoker's lines around your lips. I wanted to make sure that any product concept we create is targeting a genuine need that is not fully being fulfilled by existing market solutions. Similarly, we also realized that peach fuzz or fine facial hair is a large need, and yet the current solutions in the market are things like waxing, threading, dermaplaning. All of these are mechanical processes that tend to cause irritation, especially to people with sensitive skin. And there are no products that really, help. No gentle solutions to issues like this. And so, we knew Tanaka wood from Burma, for example, has been used for millennia by Burmese women. They apply it on their face and they use it not just to detox and purify their skin, but over time it reduces the regrowth of facial hair. So those were the sort of insights that were absolutely foundational in kicking off our product journey. So there was a brand value prop journey, and in parallel, we were doing these consumer insights and market insights to identify unmet needs as far as product benefit goes. So that was the starting point.
So you go through this journey of the market research, understanding consumer needs. And by the way, with those focus groups, those 80 to 90 consumers, could you just tell us how did you actually recruit those? Did you, and mechanically, how did you get those done?
Well, this was hugely dependent on my network, and so I really leveraged, friendships, and I think almost all my professional relationships are can be qualified as friendships over time. So that's what I depended on hugely. I sent the word out. I had a very clear target market in mind because I wanted consumers. I wanted sophisticated consumers, or you can call them naive experts, right? These are people who are familiar with the category, they are involved in the category, they might be critical of the category, they're already using, and this was another criteria, they're already using really good products. And so when you speak to them, the bar is a little bit higher in terms of getting them interested in trying something else, right? So having a very clear set of criteria, recruitment criteria, is critical. I also wanted geographic diversity and people I wanted to talk to because the dangers of operating in a bubble. so so having these recruitment criteria and then just reaching out to my network with a very clear email saying this is what I'm looking for, and then they put me in touch with friends. From friends it went to friends of friends to friends of friends, and that's how I was able to recruit quite a few
Okay.
folks.
There's a few areas I'd love to explore. So one of them is learning about how you went about just creating the entire brand visual identity, the name, the colors, the concept of the visual design on your website. It's just absolutely stunning. I'd love to
Wow.
also hear about the product design and formulation and just how you got that to happen. And then, if we have time, I'd love to also go into how do you actually get the word out there, and the sale of the product and fulfillment and the more operational piece. So maybe,
Absolutely.
where would you like to start? You want to start with product formulation? I'd love to hear about how that works.
Sure thing, Will. I think, yeah, let's start there because I have a feeling if I get into brand, it'll be hard for you to make me stop. So I'll start with product formulations. So product formulations, we already sort of hit on the very starting point, which is uh, honing in on sort of the consumer need that we wanted to fulfill from the product. From there, it was not an easy process. What I did was I started to create a product brief. And the product brief has a couple of critical components. It's got to have obviously the benefit you want, usually a consumer insight, then a target audience. You ideally any formulator will also ask you for benchmarks. They will ask you for things like what do you want the texture to feel like, any kind of ingredients you want to incorporate or you don't want to incorporate, and then any other criteria. In any other criteria, for example, I had things like we want to be a clean beauty brand and a non-toxic brand. So it meant things like, no artificial fragrance, no artificial colors, and a lot more ingredients that have been very acceptable in the skincare industry for decades are things that we wanted to formulate without. Because apart from sort of the brand proposition, which is at a little bit more emotional level that we talked about, this whole regional riches from India, I also at a rational level wanted an extremely clean, non-toxic, and a high performance product. Which also meant that I needed to be a bit more flexible in terms of the cost parameters that I gave to the lab, right? So those are all the components that went into the product brief. And just as we think about strategy as strategy consultants, anything that you do and execute upon, having the foundation and the strategy is really important. That two-page product brief is a very, very critical component of setting you up on a path of developing the product. So that was one part. The second part I talk about is a really interesting aspect of this industry, right? There are many ways to get a product and go to market. There's a whole spectrum. So the easiest thing to do is to go and get an existing formula from an ingredient supplier, and there are lots of labs that have ready-made formulas, and you can take them, you can ask them to tweak it a little bit, like, tweak the color a little bit or fragrance a little bit, and then the formula is yours, right? You don't own the formula in that case, but your speed to market is, gosh, 2 months, as far as the product is concerned. So that's one way of doing it. Pros and cons: pros, speed to market; cons, you don't own the product. Pros, speed to market and cost; cons, you don't own the product, and questionable how differentiated that can be, right? So that's the easiest way to do it. On the other end of the spectrum, you get to own the formula, but then you hire a lab or a scientist or someone to develop the formula for you, in which case you have to pay them upfront for their services, right? So it's a much more costly method, but the upside of that is you get to determine the formula that you want, right? So where I had all these things that I wanted in the product, and in terms of efficacy and feel and not toxic, I mean, getting an off-the-shelf formula was not even an option for me, and ownership of the formula was really important to me. And I really believe that the product can't be compromised on. And so that's why it was a 3.5-year formulation journey, but that's the route we took. So once you have the product brief, you also know which sort of strategy or path you want to go down in terms of your product formulation, a lab or owning your formula versus taking it off the shelf. And I'm simplifying a little bit. There's also like multiple options between the two. You can pay a manufacturer to create a formula for you, and they do it for free, but then you would need to promise them that you would only manufacture with them. So you're still kind of tied to it, and you don't own the formula, but you've gotten a little bit more flexibility in the creation of the formula. So there are all these various paths, and after evaluating all these options, we chose that the best path for us, more expensive, more time consuming, but would get us a high quality output, was the one where we hire a lab and a scientist and do it the way we want to. And then the third.
And when you say that you, like,
yeah.
on the one where you don't own the formula, where they sort of have something like an off the shelf that you could, add your own scent to or color or something and modify it slightly. When you say you don't own the formula, does that mean that they will actually not give you the formula? Like, you don't even know what is exactly in it and the percentages, or that you don't have the kind of intellectual property rights to it in terms of owning it because you're just customizing theirs?
Both. And then you can negotiate on a few things, right? So for example, a manufacturer that you go with and who's customizing the formula for you, you can say that, look, okay, I promise to give you all my volumes for the next 2 years, but once I've hit a certain volume with you, or a certain level of business with you, then you will transfer the formula over to me like 2 years later or 3 years later. But yes, when you don't own the formula, you don't get the formula, and you don't have the IP for it.
Oh, so you don't even get it. So in the world of cosmetics and skincare, like, are formulas actually kind of trademarked? Or if you were able to do some kind of chemical analysis of someone else's formula and figure out what it's made out of by, some chemistry magic, could you just go and make that same thing and, make it, have some other manufacturer make it for you? So to what degree?
Right. Yeah. I mean, really, really critical question. There's no trademark around the formula, and you're required to disclose all your ingredients on your label in descending order all the way until about you hit 1%, and anything less than 1%, you have the option to disclose it in any order. So any ingredient that you've incorporated in your formula that's more than 1% has to be in descending order of volume. So to that extent, there's a lot of transparency around the label. There's still a few things. For example, you get an ingredient from, say, a BASF or a Symrise, one of the big sort of ingredient players, and that ingredient is a complex. And when you declare it on the label, you have to break it up into three components. So people might not very easily and very perfectly be able to reverse engineer your formula, but it's not it's not impossible. With time and trial and error, you could probably do it. And so, that I guess is one of the reasons why a lot of people might say, hey, may as well go with an existing formula. I think it's just when you have a vision for a very specific kind of product and a certain level of quality, is when you sort of go down the path of owning your formula. It's not as much the value from the trademark as much as the value, I think, of being able to create something that's customized for a specific need or an audience or a benefit, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And can you share just, I mean, order of magnitude? What's kind of the range of cost to develop your own formula for some product?
Sure thing. It would range anywhere from about, I'd say, $7,000 to $18,000 to $20,000 per formula, approximately,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I say that after having met at least about 50 labs and scientists all across the US, some in Europe, and quite a few in India. And then there are pockets, there are places where labs, manufacturers tend to be concentrated. For example, in the US, it just happens to be a lot more on the West Coast. Like LA has quite a few, Texas has a few, Florida has a few, and then there's a lot in the New York, New Jersey area. But yeah, I'd say that's the ballpark if you want to own the formula. You might get super lucky and get something slightly less than that, but that's the sort of range you might want to think about.
And what are these? How do you go about identifying these labs? And is it industry conferences you went to, or just looking
Yeah,
up on the internet, or how do you find them?
yeah.
And what do they look like? Is it just one person in a in a lab room? Are they big facility, sophisticated manufacturing facilities? What do these places look like?
Sure. Um, so, okay, where do you find them? First question. Um, so I was fortunate enough because I'd done a bit of work in this space, and I had clients, I had friends, I had professionals. I reached out to all of them. I'd actually worked with R&D folks, because of some of my background, etc. So I reached out to all of them, their contacts and things like that. I also did a lot of LinkedIn search, found a lot of people that way, had conversations that way. But the biggest, the third way of finding them is just industry magazines. So there's a magazine called GCI, which is a really good magazine. There's another magazine called Beauty Independent, which is another very good magazine. So I think the industry publications are actually really high quality and good resources for someone starting off. Anyone thinking about doing anything in the space, I think signing up, subscribing to these magazines is a great way to just get started.
Mm.
And then the fourth would absolutely be exhibitions. I went to at least about 20 to 25 exhibitions. I was showing up at all these chemist conferences where I guess I was the only non-chemist walking the aisles and looking for, they're all PhDs in chemistry. Like it would, and you could read that this was a conference hall of scientists. You can tell. So, but that's where I found my lab, my scientists, and then it was just a series of conversations, interviews, that sort of led to the choice.
So you start the process once you've selected a lab. You start the process with this product briefing that you described, and then what's the process look like of working with the lab and iterating, and maybe getting test samples and trying them out and giving the feedback? Could you just describe what that process looks like?
Absolutely. Um, I mean, well, I think for one of our products, we landed up creating about 100 versions before I was ready to take it to market. I'm not proud of that. I'm just saying that's what happened. But then for another of the products, it landed up being 15 versions, I think, which was a lot more sane, way of getting to market. But that's what happened. They take the product brief. You sit down, you make sure you go over every element and make sure they understand what you mean by what's in the product brief, ask questions, all of that. And that session's really important. Think of it as almost a kickoff that we have in consulting, right? Making sure we're on the same page in terms of scope. Um, then the process kicks off, the formulator disappears. They have to source ingredients to do this. A lot of the big companies like the ones I was talking about, BASF, Symrise, good labs have relationships with them, and they'll give the samples for free because they know that the real game is when you get to manufacturing, and they want you to try their ingredients. So the formulator and the lab will start to put together some idea of what they want going in. Then, in my case specifically, because it was a concept that is so inspired by India, I had some ingredients based on my 2-3 years of research and speaking to dermatologists and Ayurveda doctors and everybody in India and my own experience. I knew I wanted incorporated because I knew from customs and rituals that they help meet that particular benefit that that product brief is targeting. So we gather the ingredients, and if the formulator can't source some of them, he or she would turn to you to get help with getting those ingredients. And then the process of putting it together, they start creating the sample and they keep sending you versions. In my case, like I would test every version, and I would take 3 days because I would use that version for 3 days and then give feedback. And when I really sort of change direction drastically, say, every 5 or 6 versions later, then I would actually, buy like extra samples, 6 or 7 of them, and give them to people and get their feedback as well. That was a pretty complex process because I was constantly getting samples, maintaining like a huge Excel spreadsheet where I had every version, who I gave it to, when I gave it to, and then like I'll follow up with them for feedback, keep all the feedback while also using every version myself. And that's what really helped me drive to sort of the version that I was happy with. And then there's an incredibly important aspect of it of this, which is stability, right? And I'm not even getting into safety, but we knew all the ingredients going in are safe, so we at least had that. But then there's the stability of the product, and that can change, right? It can be really stable day 1, and on day 15, the product can just break down. So there were many things that are happening in parallel as far as the formulation is concerned. You're sourcing the ingredients from very many places. In our case, we actually have 120 ingredients that have gone into 5 formulas. So it's a complex product. It's not a 2-ingredient product. So that was a big aspect. Then you are formulating samples, you're giving out samples, you're getting feedback, you're feeding that into implications for change to the formulator. That process keeps happening. The formulator in parallel is going on putting these products, the ones that you are close to approving, on stability, which means at 40-degree temperature, 50-degree temperature, freezing temperature, and room temperature. So that's sort of the standard 4 temperatures at which stability is done, right? So that's all happening because the product has to be stable and it has to perform before you can say, okay, let's move to the next stage.
And so, how long do you keep them around to see if they're going to be stable?
3 months is a good time.
3 months.
3 months is a good time for stability data. And then, of course, you have to account for the fact that you might not pass stability in the first round. So, a month and a half down the line. And stability is also a science. So it's not pass or fails. It's usually a scale of 1 to 5. So, for example, if the color in the product went, which happened to us because we use no artificial colors to mask the colors of the natural ingredients. So if it went from like a bluish green to a more faded green in month 2, what do I want to do? That's my decision. In my case, it was like a slight color fading. I don't care as long as the efficacy and the product experience doesn't get compromised, because so those are calls you have to take, which are more complex than pass or fail on things like stability. Right?
And then, so let's say you now land at your final formula and stability is good. Is there some kind of registration or certification process, or just some kind of like government body that you have to get permission before you can sell this formula?
It's interesting. There actually is the requirements to get into selling your products are just really low. It's almost scary. Like, I mean, you can, the onus is on you to get a clean product, to get a safe product to market. And if something goes wrong, then, that's how sort of the repercussions are on you. But things like safety testing, which we landed up doing, but they're not a requirement. So there's a test for safety called the HRIPT, which is the Human Repeat Insult Patch Test. And so that test takes anywhere between 6 to 12 weeks, 6 to 10 weeks. Um, and they basically, these are independent labs, independent evaluation labs that will just run safety tests. So they'll take your product, they'll ask for like, bulk, like, a 1 kg of your product, and they will apply it as a patch test to consumers every day for like 30 days or something like that, and then tell you whether you pass or fail. And they're pretty stringent. If you've gone to a panel of like 100 people, if more than one has irritation, you fail the test. So we chose to do those tests, but they are not required. Similarly, there's another test called the preservative test, which basically tests whether they introduce foreign objects or a bacteria into your product and sees if the preservative system in your cosmetic skincare product is able to handle bacteria and these foreign particles at a certain reasonable level, and so you have to pass that test. So I'd say these are the three critical tests: safety, preservative, and then stability test. There is one more: compatibility, which is testing whether your product is compatible with the packaging you've chosen, which usually, for example, glass is pretty stable. So if you're using glass, you don't necessarily need to do that. But those are the 4 tests that are, once you do them, you feel pretty confident taking it to the market. But again, to answer your question, they're not required. These are things that you just do to safeguard yourself and make sure you're getting quality products into the market.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about developing the whole brand identity, as well as it sort of fits into that a bit, selecting the packaging, because it seems with a skincare brand, just the visual appearance of the package itself probably matters quite a bit. Talk to me
Yeah.
about that whole process.
Yeah. I think in this one, well, it starts with a vision. It really does. And somewhere, this whole brand, like this brand is a very personal brand, at least for me, right? Like it was born out of my personal journey of having been in India and then moved here as an immigrant, having 2 homes, and um, both of these places that I called home have actually sort of gone into the creation of the brand. So I think when you're creating a brand, there is some degree of soul searching that is required in terms of what do you want this brand to be? What do you want it to stand for? And I knew that somewhere both these aspects of my world and my life had to come together in this brand. Right. And then there was also a bit of nostalgia and emotion involved. And the brand name was a nightmare because it just did not feel right. And then one day, like, and I, the brand name was a self creation, even though I had help from like designers and agencies, but somehow it was something that had to come, I think, a little bit from me. And when I first sort of saw a version of this, which is Love, India, and I was like, there's something there, because it's also words are really important to me. And so the idea of a sign off of a letter was really powerful. It was almost like a sign off of a love letter from that subcontinent. But I was resisting the word India because, it just, again, going back to value systems, soul searching, like the political boundaries, just given the environment, etc., was not something I felt very comfortable with. But then I said, Indus, because Indus was like a civilization cut across political boundaries. The name, had almost sort of, took you to a point in time and place without having sort of geographical boundaries around it. And it just felt right. But the process of getting there was so much of brainstorming, so much of soul searching, figuring out about, what you wanted to stand for, um, what sort of name you want it to be. For example, like I resisted having any kind of a Sanskrit name because I felt like a lot of Indian brands tend to do that. And that's something I didn't want. I wanted it to be a little bit more universal. And yet I wanted it to allude to that place that's giving rise and it's giving rise to the inspiration. So I think it's a lot about having greater level of clarity in terms of what the soul of this brand is, and then the brand name is sort of an outcome of testing various things and seeing what fits. And then, I did obviously get a lot of consumer feedback on the names before deciding on this one.
And in the process of creating the entire brand identity, visual identity, was the name really the first step that unlocked everything else, or were you also proceeding in parallel? Like, when did you do the more visual elements, the colors, the fonts, the kind of the design elements, the vision for the feel of the website? Is that all in parallel with the name, or does it follow from the name? How did you go about that process?
Well, the brand name did unlock a little bit, right? The brand name and then the colors, right? When we started talking about colors, for example, um, I got a lot of resistance in deciding on these colors, especially because gray and then an ink blue. I had someone in New York who was advising me around the packaging colors, and he was really resisting because he said, like that blue was. It's a primary color, and he also felt very justifiably so that gray and blue are, you know, colors that are usually targeting men. And part of me also in that soul searching wanted to resist stereotypes. So I was like, well, we can change that. We can challenge that. And the second thing was when I realized that, indigo, the word indigo is, the oldest dye known to mankind. It is also derived from a Greek word that actually means from India, so it's very representative of the region. And then it's also the color of ink and words and goes so well with the whole concept of letter writing and the sign off of a love letter. It just fit, right? So after seeing all these colors, because I knew what the soul of the brand was, and the brand name came, the colors seemed right for the brand. And once we also knew the brand proposition, that fed into the idea and the branding of the collections, because in skincare, you also have sub brands, right? So one of our and one of our collections is called Amrutini. And Amrutini is two words. Amrut in Sanskrit means nectar, and martini from New York. And so every element really derived from that brand proposition and what that brand stands for, which is the coming together of these two worlds, this confluence and contrast that defines our brand. We almost have like these four lines that we write, against the brand, which is it's a journey of east and west, of heart and soul, of confluence and contrast, of dreams and drama, of emotions and potions. Once sort of some of that language started to describe the brand, the choices became clearer and clearer and more cohesive. Um, so that's what sort of the brand name happened, the proposition was there, the colors start to make sense, the collections, the name started to make sense. And then the other part of the brand that was important to me is to just be true and transparent. And so, I almost laid down 6 or 7 criteria I had for the packaging. One, it wasn't going to be the regular shape. So our logo is a heart that's made up of 14 different triangles. So I wanted the shape of a triangle. And again, this is way more complex than it sounds. There's a reason this industry, you don't see triangle shaped packaging in skincare. It is incredibly complex, shipping, making, all of that. But it was just super important to me because, like as you rightly said, packaging is a key element of the consumer experience. The second part was that I wanted both these worlds of India and New York represented. So we have one side of the triangle that is all about the region that has inspired this collection. So In Amrutini, it's like West Bengal. So we've got this Bengali script that's writing all the benefits. We've got art from that region, which is Kantha art, in which we've designed that panel of the packaging. The other panel was all black and white photographs from New York. So because Amrutini is focused on building skin strength, every image we chose spoke of strength. So for New York imagery, we chose the Oculus and the Brooklyn Bridge. And so that was sort of, so the things for the packaging was I wanted it in a triangle. I wanted both worlds represented. I wanted the colors to be inspired by the colors of the product itself. So the Amrutini range is a bluish green. So the packaging is a little bit of teal and blue colors. And then we always sign off our brand as like the sign of a letter, right? So usually you'll see that the brand name is in the center of the panel. Ours is actually on the lower right-hand side because it's a sign off. So there were a few things, and then this poetry that I just read out to you, I wanted it to be in every packaging. It was almost a message. And the final thing was that I wanted the benefit to actually go to a more emotional level. So the Amrutini range says, from us to a stronger you. The other range, which is freedom of expression, says from us to a freer you. So again, sort of building on the thought that this is more than just a product you're putting on your skin. We want you to immerse yourself in this experience.
That is incredible. There's so many different layers of thinking in that design and branding. That's really cool to hear you unpack that.
Thank you.
Tell us about the piece about actually getting the product in people's hands, from the e-commerce to the fulfillment that you're using. How did that piece all work?
That well, there's so much of learning of things that never done in my life, and but again, I think the good thing about being a strategy consultant is that that's not something that we've not seen before. So logistics, there are a lot of tools in the market and people in the market who specialize in some of this, which makes logistics and fulfillment fairly easy. For again, just whatever you've learned about the brand, you wouldn't be surprised that I was very keen that the website experience be customized. So we didn't go with like a templated version on, say, a Shopify. But we still wanted the back end to be something that we don't invent. That's not our core capability. That's not something we want to do. So there's enough platforms like Shopify that do a really good job of e-commerce and integrating with fulfillment. And so we didn't want to reinvent that. But we spent all our energies into the front end experience, which is what the consumer sees the most, and the imagery around it and the text and everything. So that's something that we focused on. I was personally involved in writing every word on that website and the visuals around it and stuff like that. But the back end did not want to innovate for the reasons we just said. There's, in terms of logistics, there are a lot of solution providers out there. There are also turnkey solution providers. My experience was that they're extremely expensive and just wasn't worth it for us. It's when, with the same resources, I wanted to also make decisions around where those resources were going to create most impact. And we decided it was mostly going to be the product and the consumer experience. And so you've got fulfillment agencies, you've got, places like Shopify are incredible. Once you've got your website set up and the e-commerce goes to them, they are already integrated with, say, courier providers. And there are tons of apps that you can download and integrate into your website that will automatically do things like creating shipping labels. I also have hired someone to help me on the logistical and operational side of things. But that part of it, even though it was completely unfamiliar, there are a lot of resources that have it all figured out. It is not something that would hold back a startup or create like a lot of hiccups. Has been my experience, and they're all integrated with even things like payment gateways, and all you have to do is agree to the terms, and there's a cost involved. So, for example, Shopify would, depending on the plan, would take anything from like about 3% to 2% of every card transaction, plus 30 cents or something like that. And then your shipping labels are something that you can just print online. So, and then warehousing, given that we are a luxury brand, it's a clean brand, and it does require some right handling. So we just had to find a facility that maintains temperature, somewhere around like 50 to 60 degrees, and just rent that space. So that's what the logistics really involves.
Incredible. Well, many, many things that you had to solve after coming up with the idea 5 or 6 years ago of this vision of a skincare and wellness brand with a kind of luxury India positioning, with these natural ingredients. So we will certainly include the link in the show notes, but just remind listeners, where can they go find more about Love Indus and buy some product.
Of course. Well, the website is www.loveindus.com, which is LOVEINDUS.com. We also have an Instagram page, which is the same name, Love Indus. And on Facebook, we have Love Indus NY. So those are our primary three properties. We'll be on LinkedIn soon, where we hope to find a lot of our Umbrex members that we shall invite to the page as well. But yeah, I would be more than happy to have conversations with any of our Umbrex community, and get them to experience the products.
Fantastic. And you are also still consulting, of course. For someone who
Yes.
wants to follow up with you and learn more about your consulting practice, where would you point them?
So steelandgraffiti.com, or they can also find me on the Umbrex platform, of course, as well as on LinkedIn, but with my name, Surbhee Grover, SURBHEEGROVER.
Well, Surbhee, thank you so much for joining today. This was fascinating hearing about what it takes to start a skincare brand. Thank you so much. This was really a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Will. I'm so happy to do this.